All right, so today we're going to dive into something really powerful. It's a theological argument that wasn't born in some quiet library, you know? It was forged in 400 years of public grief and protest. It's called the Longest Lament.
And really, it all starts with this one question. A question that is just so raw, so devastating, it just hangs there, demanding an answer. And this, right here, this is the emotional and theological core of everything we're about to unpack.
So, to really get this question, we need to go back to a specific time and a specific place. We're talking about Ferguson, Missouri, August 2014, and we need to imagine ourselves standing there with a mother named Leslie McSpadden.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting, in how the source material frames what happened next. After her son Michael Brown was killed, his body was left right there in the street. And her cry, that question, it wasn't some quiet prayer of resignation. No. The source actually calls it a forensic accusation. It's like a summons being issued to both the state and to God.
Think about that for a second. More than 4 hours. For over 4 hours, his body was just there, uncovered on the asphalt. And that detail, it's not just tragic, right? It's a public spectacle. And it's in that crucible, that horrifying space of time, that this entire theological argument really begins.
Okay, so let's zoom out a bit, because the central argument here is that what happened with Leslie McSpadden, her vigil, that wasn't an isolated event. Not at all. It's actually part of a much longer story, a 400-year history of what's called Black maternal witness.
I mean, for centuries, Black mothers have been forced to stand at these sites of state-sanctioned violence against their own children. Think about it. From the auction blocks back in 1619, to the lynching trees, to prison yards, and all the way up to today on our city streets. It's this heartbreaking, unbroken line of public mourning and protest.
And through all of it, at every single one of those sites, they've shared one incredibly powerful thing. A refusal. A refusal to accept one persistent lie. The idea that these awful deaths were somehow part of God's plan. And that single, powerful no, well, that's the bedrock of the entire theology we're talking about today.
So here's the crucial point, right? This 400-year refusal, it isn't just a political protest. It's more than that. It has actually forged, out of all that grief, brand new ways of understanding God, suffering, and even hope. In other words, it created its own theology.
And out of this tradition, two really core ideas have emerged. First, you've got what's called the Black maternal theology of the cross. This is all about rereading the crucifixion, but through the eyes of mothers who have watched their own children be killed by the state. And then there's Black relational eschatology. And that's this really profound idea that death doesn't actually end a relationship, it just changes it. The dead are still bound to the living.
You know, the source calls these ideas technologies of endurance. And I just think that phrase is incredible, because it tells you these aren't just abstract theories from some classroom, right? No, these are practical tools for survival. And they were created in that unbearable space between a child's last breath and the first lie told to explain it all away.
Okay, but what's so fascinating is where this goes next. Because this lived experience, it leads to a totally radical rereading of ancient scripture. This isn't about tossing the Bible aside, not at all. It's about reading it through the tears, through the lens of this long, long lament.
Okay, so take the book of Job, for example. We're often taught it's a story about patience and suffering, right? Well, this theology says, no, that's not it. It's a trial. It's literally a trial. Job drags God into court and demands an answer. He holds God accountable. And in doing that, he provides a kind of scriptural permission slip for Black mothers to do the exact same thing. And then there's Mary at the foot of the cross. This perspective completely changes how we see her. She's not some sentimental, passive icon of sadness. No way. By staying right there at a state execution, by refusing to look away, she becomes the very first maternal theologian of the cross. She is the prototype for the 4 centuries of mothers who came after her.
Okay, so let's get to the big question. Why does all this matter, especially right now? What's the big takeaway here? Let's break down its significance.
So the argument here is really seen as groundbreaking for a few key reasons. For one, it actually names these original theological categories. It also does something huge. It treats the witness of Black mothers as an authoritative way to interpret Scripture, not just as a sad story. And finally, it pulls together all these different fields like the Hebrew Bible and womanist theology that don't always talk to each other.
And what this does, and this is so crucial, is it provides a really deep, scholarly framework for the protest we see happening in the streets. Think about movements like Black Lives Matter. This work takes the questions being shouted on the pavement and shows that they have these incredibly deep historical and even biblical roots.
And if you remember one thing from this whole explainer, let it be this. The experiences of mothers like Leslie McSpadden, they aren't just illustrations of a theological argument, they are the argument. Their witness, their grief, their absolute refusal to look away, that's it. That is the argument. Their lived experience is the primary data.
So that leaves us with a challenge, doesn't it? The whole point here is that true theology, and maybe by extension all of us, are not allowed to just look away from suffering. So if we take that seriously, if we really commit to not looking away, then the final question isn't for a book, it's for us. What are we now responsible for seeing?